Joining me now for another edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show with the Knicks back home and taking on the 10-25 Portland Trail Blazers at MSG on Tuesday night. We welcome on another legend from the Substack world, from the Rose Garden Report. He covers the Portland Trail Blazers. Please welcome Sean Highkin. Welcome to the Knicks Film School Podcast, Sean.
Thanks for having me on, Andrew. Good to be with you.
I'm happy to have you, and I'm interested to talk about this basketball team, the Portland Trail Blazers, that are 10-25. And just recently, on Patreon, Mr. Macri and I did a power rankings, and we don't do like the best teams in the league 1 to 30. We don't do the like championship contenders. It's a how you feeling power rankings, and I didn't know where really to put the Blazers. Obviously, it was closer to the bottom of the rankings as far as like the bottom 5 are concerned, because there's like 5 teams that are quote unquote tanking. Mm-hmm. But usually you have a player, whether it be the Spurs with Wemby or the Pistons with Cade, or even the Hornets with LaMelo, that you could be like, we have a player that we're at least excited to be building around. And with Portland, you would think it's Scoot Henderson, but with what happened in November with him having to go to the G League, there's some questions from the outside looking in. So if you could, let's just start there, enlighten us. How have things gone this year with Scoot to the Knicks fan that hasn't watched a ton of the Blazers this year? And is there any cause for concern that the vibes would have you not feeling very great at the moment?
Well, just for some clarity, Scoot was not sent to the G League to play. That was I think like a 2-hour rehab assignment. Basically,
oh, okay, got it.
The team was he was coming off the ankle injury, and the team was on the road and wasn't going to practice, and so that was basically they just had him go down there and they literally sent out we assigned him and we recalled him announcements like 2 hours apart. So he basically just like went out there and got a practice in. So he was not assigned to.
He was not officially playing in the G League. Got it.
He has not. He has not appeared in a game with the Rip City remix. But
the better clarification then, real quick, is just based off of how his season has gone. It has been, one would argue, a disappointment. Maybe you can clarify how much of a disappointment it's been.
Well, it depends on what you were expecting. Like if you go in expecting, well, he's the number 3 overall pick, and they're basically, because they drafted him, is why Damian Lillard, the franchise's all-time leading scorer, requested a trade, and then they trade Dame 2 days before the start of training camp or whatever it was, and then now Scoot's the guy. If you look at it from that standpoint, it's been a disappointment. He the first 5 he played in 5 games at the beginning of the season, and before he had the ankle injury, and it was not good. Like, it did not go well. It was pretty rough. He was just not ready for it. And then, he's come back from the ankle injury. He's mostly been coming off the bench until recently. They had some injuries, so he was moved back into the starting lineup, and he's been starting for the last week or so, and I think he's going to continue to start for the next little bit. And I would say it's getting better. Like, he's starting to figure it out a little bit. In terms, like, there'll be 1 or 2 plays a game where you're just like one of those like highlight passes where you're just like, okay, this is what this could be, or like a finish at the rim, or like the athleticism is still like crazy. Like when he does get downhill and he has a chance to finish, it's pretty incredible. But it's just, it's still a lot of, bad turnovers, fouls that are, called on rookies for reaching in too hard defensively. The 3-point shot is still very much a work in progress. I think that's gotten a little bit better over the last month or so, but that's still very much not where it would need to be long term. But I think the thing that people need to remember, and I've actually kind of been trying to all summer manage people's expectations on this stuff. How many 19-year-old point guards have come in and been good right away? Like, there's really hasn't been, like, I can think off the top of my head, like Derrick Rose when he came out of Memphis, that was the number 1 pick, or like Kyrie Irving 10 years ago. But like De'Aaron Fox was awful his rookie year. So was Darius Garland. Dame was awesome his rookie year, but people forget that he was a 4-year college guy. So he was 22 when he came into the NBA. It's a different level of readiness for it. So I kind of think it was always going to take some time with Scoot, but all the stuff you hear about him behind the scenes, as far as like, he puts in the work, he's coachable, he's a good teammate, and he watches film, all that kind of stuff. All of those sort of indicating factors are there to make you think, okay, like, it's a little premature to just write this guy off because the first 2 months of his rookie season at 19 haven't gone the way that maybe people thought they would based on where he was drafted.
So based off of the we'll say slow arrival that has started. Like you said, there's somewhat of a project nature to him, although like you said, he's 19 and there's a long history of 19-year-olds coming into the league, especially a point guard, and being all the way ready. How's the fan base taking it? Are they patient? Because this is the guy that replaced Dame technically, in if you want to just make the one-to-one as the next point guard in the franchise. But is there, while there's a learning curve for him, is the fan base able to accept said learning curve and the timeline that comes with it?
I think most people, I mean, you're always going to see, extreme reactions at one end of the spectrum or the other on social media, depending on how much of that stuff you look at. As a beat writer, it's like my responsibility to at least look at enough of that stuff to kind of get the general idea of what people are talking about and where people's heads are at as far as the fan base is concerned. So of course, on one, you'll see he has a good game and there are some people who are like, this means he's a future all-star and he's fully figured it out now. And then you'll see some people after the first 5 games of the season where he was terrible are just prepared to just call a kid a bust and say like, it's over, it's not going to happen. I think by and large, because, Dame requested the trade on July 1st. I think everybody knew that eventually the trade was going to happen. It didn't happen until like the end of the summer. But once it happened, people had kind of had the whole summer to, prepare for the fact that once, a arguably top 10 player in the league, and Damian Lillard, who's been there for 10 years, is not there anymore. The record is probably going to be what the record is probably going to be. And then for the next couple of years, that's just kind of what it's going to be. And you don't worry as much about wins as losses as you do about development. And so I think those expectations being set from the beginning, where it's not like they go into the season thinking they're going to be a playoff team. Everybody knew what this was going to be as far as where they were going to be in the standings. And I think that lends people more to being willing to be patient and let this kid figure it out. And I think also just the fact that he's 19, so it's like you can't really expect Luka's 19. Luka was 19 when he came to the league, but that's a different thing. He's 6'7". It's not the same thing as like a 6'4" point guard who, generously listed at 6'4", but like I don't think there's a whole lot of panic among the fan base from what I've seen, and certainly people I've talked to in the organization and in the front office are happy with how things progressed and kind of understood. And like you talked to Chauncey Billups about him, and I think everybody understood that even though he played in the G League last year, which is a professional league, like it was going to take a little bit of time for someone that young to get used to the speed and the physicality of the league. And, his decision making was going to have to improve, and, he was going to have to get used to like the way he's officiated and the way he's defended, the way that he's defended, or, what's he going to do if he drives to the rim and doesn't have anything, like where does he go with stuff? That stuff, I think everybody in the organization and everybody whose opinion matters on this stuff kind of knew that it wasn't going to happen overnight. And I think overall, if you ask guys, if you ask like Chauncey or you ask people in the front office, I think people are pretty happy with where things are at, all things considered. And I think people expected it to be a multi-year thing with him to become whatever he's going to become.
Well, just being a box score scout for a second and seeing how his minutes have gone up, and with the minutes going up, his usage has gone up as well. What should a Knicks fan expect on Tuesday night, specifically from Scoot, as far as his involvement in the offense, his overall, I'm trying to think of the right word to use it, but like how much he's featured in the offense. I know this is mostly Anthony Simon's team when it comes to the points and then the rebounds and everything. Well, really the points being scored along with Jeremy Grant. But what should a Knicks fan be somewhat concerned that this is a Portland team, like they're coming off a win against Brooklyn, and that the formula for how they can get a win across town might actually work against them as well.
Well, the guard rotation has been interesting just because they've had so many guys in and out over the last couple of weeks or so. Scoot has been starting, and he's going to start again tomorrow. Like we asked Chauncey after the game because Scoot, and this was a little bit of a talking point, did not play basically at all in the fourth quarter and overtime. And I think that was more. And Scoot was fine yesterday. I think he shot 3 for 8, but didn't have any turnovers. It was a decent game for him. It wasn't he wasn't terrible out there, but Chauncey just didn't close with him because who they had out there with Shaedon Sharpe, Malcolm Brogdon, like the lineup that he had out there was working, so he stuck with it. And so that's kind of, it's like a game-to-game thing. He's not a coach. Chauncey Billups is not a coach that is like super set in his rotations where this guy goes in at this time, this guy plays this many minutes, this guy only plays with this guy. Like he's going to try stuff out.
Like Tom Thibodeau, one might say.
I know. I used to cover the Bulls back in. I know Tom very well, so I've heard. I know exactly what you're talking about there. And honestly, the Blazers' former head coach Terry Stotts was pretty rigid in his rotations at times too. No, Chauncey's willing to kind of try stuff out, and there have been times where he's kept Scoot in late in games when maybe he shouldn't have because he wanted him to get the reps. So it's going to be it, because yesterday, he closed with Malcolm Brogdon because Malcolm Brogdon was playing well. And I think, you can say, for a rebuilding team, it's more important for the younger guys to get the reps, but also they were coming off a pretty disastrous start to this 7-game road trip where they get blown out the first game in Phoenix. They get blown out. Then they have the baseball series in Dallas. They get blown out in the first game. And then the second game, Luka doesn't play and they get blown out again. And then they've got the Knicks tomorrow, who are a pretty decent playoff team and haven't lost a game since they traded for OG. And then they close the road trip with a back-to-back with Minnesota and Oklahoma City, the two best teams in the West. So if they didn't get that Nets game, that could be an 0-7 road trip. And then you're talking about something very different as far as the vibe, so to speak. So I think they kind of felt like they needed to get a win. And if that meant leaning more on the veteran guys like Malcolm Brogdon and Anthony Simons than somebody like Scoot, who you can say long-term maybe needs the reps more, I think that's something they're willing to do. But Chauncey's attitude the whole time has been for these younger guys, and you saw this a little bit with Shaedon Sharpe last year when he was a rookie and still kind of figuring it out his way, in the NBA. If you earn minutes, you'll play minutes. He's not going to say I'm not going to play him because he's a rookie, or I'm not going to have him out there in crunch time if he's playing well just because he's a rookie. So to answer that's a really long way of not answering your question, but they don't really have a set, this is their closing lineup. It just kind of varies from game to game depending on matchups and, who's playing well or which lineups are, kind of getting results or not at the moment.
Well, I think the biggest thing that stood out to what you just said to me about Scoot staying out there just to get the reps and to get the mistakes out, that's one thing. I value what Tibbs has brought to the Knicks and the overall job he's done. I think it's been, I have to say, it's a good one.
I like Tom a lot too. I covered him in Chicago, and he and I always got along well. I've always liked him. Well, I know he is what he is. He is what he is. There are certainly criticisms to be had of him, but I was a Tibbs guy when he was in Chicago, and I was covering him too. So.
I think I overall fall on because if you're not a Tibbs guy, you're the other side of the coin, and I'm not that. Where it's I can just imagine every fans of every team are just why isn't my coach playing this young guy that and I know that there was a little bit of he didn't like Emmanuel Quickly for whatever reason, and that's why he was included in the OG trade and whatever. But and by the way, just as an aside, when you're talking about Tibbs and the Knicks and other places where our areas of coverage have crossed over. The minute that Portland traded Josh Hart to New York last year, I was just Josh Hart is designed in a lab to be a Tibbs guy. They are wired the exact same way. They're both psychos. They're both the exact same person. As soon as that trade happened, I was he is going to be an incredible fit in New York, and he's going to be a fan favorite from day one. So I'll just throw that out there too. I love Josh. He's been, I think, for the most part, a fan favorite. There was some Josh Hart RJ lineups that just never worked that Tibbs couldn't get past. But for the most part,
Tom has guys he likes and he doesn't like.
Well, so the thing is, the Quickly lineups were always killing it when they were next to Hart. The Josh Hart Emmanuel Quickly pairing was almost. I mean, I don't even almost was always a success. Guys can shoot. Yeah. Well, no, Quickly, I would argue can.
No, I'm talking about Josh and...
the Josh Hart and RJ, yes. Especially in the playoffs when he was using it, because RJ was on a different planet and was actually hitting shots last playoffs. And so, because of how they were being guarded, it made spacing very interesting. But the point being, while I appreciate what Tibbs is, he can be set in his ways. And really 2 years ago, when the Knicks weren't going anywhere, the desire on behalf of the fan base was just give Quickly the reins for 2 months. Let's see what this is. They're not making the playoffs. They're 17 games under 500. And we saw 2 months of Alec Burks at point guard, and Quickly was nailed to the bench as like, you are the sixth man and I will not play you more than sixth man minutes. And then last year quickly earned like some starter minutes, and we got to see what that looked like, so much so that quickly's starter minutes disqualified him according to some of the voting for sixth man of the year. It's why Malcolm Brogdon ended up winning. What I take away from Chauncey Billups kind of trusting Scoot or wanting to give Scoot the reps is that this really is a rebuild, that like the priority is to get these younger kids reps, to get Shaedon Sharpe some experience in a situation where winning is not 100% the goal, in a way that will prioritize that over development. Is that a fair assessment?
Overall, yes. But I think what's been interesting about the way that they've approached this is I think everybody kind of knew, like I said before, everybody, whether it was like the fan base or those of us that cover the team or, you know, the coaching staff, the front office, pretty much everybody around the organization knew that the record was going to be what the record was going to be this season, and that they didn't even have to do any weird, like the last couple of years when they, you know, shut Dame down with the injuries and they were literally like blatantly playing G Leaguers to manipulate the lottery standings. They're not going to have to do that this year because they're just going to naturally lose enough games to get to where they need to get to with the lottery and stuff anyway. But yes, they do want to develop these guys. And I think there's going to be a lot more of that after the trade deadline when, you know, guys that maybe are here now getting minutes are maybe not here anymore. But they are not trying to be the process Sixers. They are not not trying to be Detroit or Washington, where there's just like they have these young guys, or like last year's Rockets. Like you saw, like the Rockets last year, the whole team was kids and it was a disaster. And then they spent a ton of money to bring in Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks, and were like, we need some adults. And that's why, you know, you saw like, yes, you know, you do want these young guys to get these reps, but you also don't want to put them in positions where you just throw them out there with no safety net. And then if they fail, then they lose their confidence and that could wreck their career. Like you saw that kind of happen. So at the beginning of the season, so the first night I was in LA for opening night against the Clippers. Anthony Simons and Scoot Henderson were the two starters at backcourt, at the two guard positions. Simons gets hurt in that game, has thumb surgery, misses the next 6 weeks. So for the next 4 games until Scoot gets hurt, they started Scoot Henderson and Shaedon Sharpe together. And that did not go well. It was a disaster. And because both, you know, you can't start both, you know, those two guys. And like Shaedon has gotten a lot better from where he was this time last year as a rookie, but you can't start two guys that young and that inexperienced together. Like it's just not going to go well. They're going to make too many mistakes. They kind of realize that you need some adults there. You need like some, you know, some steadying presence. And that's why, like, you'll see, you know, again, he closed with Malcolm Brogdon yesterday because Malcolm Brogdon isn't going to throw the game away by turning the ball over, because Malcolm Brogdon is a professional and an 8-year veteran and knows how to play basketball more so than some of these young guys are. And so there's a balance that you have to strike by, and this is why I think, for example, Jeremy Grant is a guy that I know comes up a lot now that it's trade rumor season. It's somebody that I don't think is going to get traded at the deadline. They realize that, like, yes, you want to develop these young guys, but you also have to have good players on your team. And it's not just like, oh, we're going to sign, we're going to have Udonis Haslem on the team, but he doesn't play, or like what the Knicks had with Taj Gibson, who's another one of my guys from Chicago from the Tibbs era. Like, they were like, yeah, we want vets, but we want guys that actually can play. We want good players to also, you know, we don't want the entire thing to just be, well, if Scoot and Shaedon aren't ready for it, then there's just no safety net. There's nobody we can put in to kind of calm them down, or have, you know, they've liked having Brogdon out there with Scoot, or Simons out there with Scoot or with Shaedon. Like Chauncey has kind of liked mixing that up and having those guys out there, maybe handcuffed to one of those, you know, more veteran guards who might know what they're doing more, because that's going to eventually, you know, if they pick up 1 or 2 extra wins, that sort of hurts them in the lottery standings. I think that's a little bit less important than long term. You want these guys that you're building your thing around to develop better habits long term.
So I'm blanking on the title, but the Jake Fisher book, that's the
Built to Lose.
Jake's my guy too. There you go. Yeah, Jake, friend of the pod, Jake Fisher. He talks about the process Sixers and how after Jahlil Okafor had that incident in
Yeah.
Philadelphia.
They basically had to beg Elton Brand to come out of retirement.
Elton Brand, Ish Smith, like Coach K literally called up the NBA and was like, I'm sending guys to the league and I'm afraid to get them drafted by the Sixers because of the situation they're getting put in. And I think the point that you're making, that you need to have veterans involved in your rebuild so that way it isn't completely stunting their growth. And what it seems to be happening among the process era of the Sixers was that none of the guys that were part of the rebuild then were part of the future or even considered to be part of the future or knew if they were going to be part of the future, and which is why with what Portland's doing, it seems to be more putting them in situations where, okay, this is where you want to get to. So we're going to put you with guys that can give you something to reach toward, right?
And you know what else has been really valuable this season with that? And I mean, this is going to be like the rest of the league is not going to view this as news, but for the first time this year, the Blazers they were one of the last two holdouts. They finally have their own G League team. So they actually have a G League team that plays in Portland. And some of their guys, like obviously like the guys like Scoot and Shaden and like, the guys that are actually playing aren't going to be doing anything there. But some of these guys, like, some of their other rookies, or like Ryan Rupert is this French kid that they drafted in the second round, who they are very high on long term, but he is very raw. He's not ready to play in the NBA, but he's been playing 30 minutes a game in the G League. And they're just like, go play in the G League and get those reps and play through mistakes and get better. And like, that's going to help you long term. So like, there's a balance of like, yeah, they do want these guys to get reps, but they're also not going to go out there saying, hey, we're cool if we win 10 games, because you don't want to win 10 games. Like, that's just miserable for, as much as like you can say it's better for the lottery odds, it's just miserable for everybody involved. Like, who was on those process Sixers teams? Jeremy Grant.
Yeah.
And, I've talked to him about it before, and I've also talked to, back when I was one of my last years covering the Bulls, they had Isaiah Cannon and Michael Carter-Williams who were on some of those process Sixers teams. And you talk to these guys about just how miserable they were going into every single one of these games, knowing that they were going to get blown out by 30. And like, you don't want to do that. You want to get these guys reps, but you also don't want to put them in positions where they get used to losing that early and they're just cool with it. And like, I'm going to be really interested to see how this goes down the stretch after the trade deadline, because I think Malcolm Brogdon is probably going to get moved. Like I said, I don't think Jeremy Grant is, because I think he's cool being here and they like him and, they want to keep some vets around. But I wouldn't be surprised if he and like Anthony Simons and DeAndre Ayton and some of those kind of more veteran guys, they maybe do a little bit of what they did last year, and suddenly those guys have like knee tendonitis or something that they have to sit out. But if they do that, I mean, what they did last year was and like really the year before too. Was so blatant, and they were literally like signing guys off the street who had never, who are just not NBA players, just to have enough bodies. If they do that this year, they're not going to shut down Scoot because he needs the reps. They're going to play him the whole way. They're not going to shut down like Shaden, maybe. I don't know. He's dealing with an adductor thing. They might decide to do something with that at some point. But like, if they do that, at least Scoot is going to be playing in all those games, because he's 19 and he can play those minutes, and he actually needs the experience. So they're not going to go all the way with every single player on our roster that you've heard of is getting shut down.
So a couple things, and then I have a follow-up question. First, what you were saying about what the Blazers did, not what they did last year, and then really what they did 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I hope this doesn't come off as disrespectful, but we have a name for that in New York. It's called the Portland Pivot. We suddenly just are like a one win in 25 game team, and it's like that's what we're waiting for after the trade deadline. The Portland Pivot, and so it's literally what we do. We call it in New York.
I think it's coming to an extent, and I mean, look, if that's what people call it, they don't have anybody to blame for that but themselves, because that's what they were doing. They were trying to manipulate the lottery standings, and sometimes it worked out. Like, in some cases, like the first year that they did it, they had the 6th odds in the lottery and they moved down to 7th. Like they actually fell down a spot. They didn't jump up like they thought they would. Ended up working out okay because Shaden Sharp was there at 7 and they took him, and they're very happy with that. last year they did the same thing. They had the 5th odds. They ended up moving up to 3. They get screwed, and they were 1 digit off. I was actually in the lottery room where they did the drawing of the ping pong balls, where they like take your phone and stuff. I did that this year, and they were 1 digit off from getting Wemby. So it's like it can go either way. You could, you could be, you could do all the stuff that they did, or like, Detroit had the worst record in the league last year. They moved back to 5 all the way, which is a disaster for them. And so, like, there's only so much of that you can do. And I think, and I've told people in the front office directly, like, I don't want to watch another year, because like I cover all these. I'm not a fan per se, but I cover all these games. I watch all these games because I have to. I can't just check out when they decide to check out for the season. I have to watch all these games, and I'm just like, I've told people in the organization this, like, you guys are gonna lose the amount of games that you need to lose to get what you need to get done as far as lottery standings anyway, just because teams that are this young are never good. But play your guys. Just lose the games organically. Don't. And I get it for some of the more veteran guys like Anthony Simons does not need to be out there playing in some of these games where you're tanking. But like, if they pull any weird shenanigans with Scoot, for example, like that's going to be a problem. But I don't think they're going to do that because he's a kid and he needs the reps.
Well, so the question I would then have is not necessarily the players that will still be there or on the other side of the deadline when the Portland pivot potentially happens.
Right.
It's more who you think will not be there anymore. You said Malcolm Brogdon. I would assume. You said Jeremy Grant would still be around. So
I don't think he's going to be moved.
So then, other than Malcolm Brogdon, who else might not be on the roster on the other side of the deadline?
The other guy that I might keep an eye on, like if you ask me, like, they're going to trade one player, who do you feel is the most strongly that they're going to trade? My answer would be Malcolm Brogdon, because it's just an obvious thing where he's a guard, and all the young guys they're building around are guards, and he's the type of guy, like, they can probably get a first from a contender for him because like that's the type of guy that you want to have. If you look at what he did with Boston last year, and like some of the teams that wanted Drew Holiday, like Utah or the Knicks or whoever could get, there would be interest in Malcolm Brogdon. Like, I think it's going to make sense for them to do that. The other guy that I would say is maybe like 50-50, and I could see that going either way, but is maybe somebody to sort of just, keep in your back pocket as somebody that might get moved, would be Matisse Thybulle. Because the type of guy that he is, in terms of like, he's this, perimeter defender, and he's become a lot better 3-point shooter as soon as he stopped playing for Doc Rivers. He was like allowed to shoot and was allowed to actually play. What he does, he's one of those guys where like what he does is more valuable to good teams than to teams in Portland's position. And he's also on a pretty good contract. He signed that offer sheet with Dallas that was 3 years, $33 million. So he's basically making mid-level money. So that's a guy that I think there's going to be some interest in from better teams at the deadline that need, some perimeter defensive upgrades. So that's, besides Brogdon, I think that's the other guy I would maybe look at. But they also, they'd be happy to keep him too, because they like him, and he's a good locker room guy, and he's still, is somebody that they like what he does, and it's hard to replace what he does. But that, outside of Brogdon, that's the other guy I might look at and say there's a chance maybe something happens there.
So based on what you're saying, DeAndre Ayton is there for the long term too.
That's a good question. The Ayton thing.
I know he's injured at the moment. We should say that.
By the way, this is like late breaking news, and this broke literally while we were on this podcast. He has been upgraded to doubtful for tomorrow.
So he was out initially, and I know the last thing I saw was no timetable for return, and so now
we asked Chauncey Billups about that
for Tuesday.
He's doubtful, but that means is, maybe he doesn't play, but the fact that he isn't listed as out, that means he's with the team again, because he wasn't with the team for the beginning of the road trip. I don't even think he was there. At least I didn't see him. And Chauncey said, we asked him pregame, and he said, we're hopeful that he rejoins us at some point on the road trip. But he was staying in Portland to get treatment, so he wasn't even on the trip until now. So I think, so the fact that he was upgraded to doubtful means he's physically here in New York now with the team, and B, if he doesn't play tomorrow, maybe he'll play one of the last 2 games of the road trip in Oklahoma City or Minnesota. But as far as like overall how that is going, it's so hard to it's hard to really definitively say one way or the other, because there have been times where there were a couple games where he was awesome, and there are other games where, he's passive or it's not, and what's interesting is that for all of the reasons that he might have to be frustrated with the situation, in terms of like he's not getting a ton of looks or a ton of touches or a ton of plays called for him, for the first 6 weeks of the season or so, body language was good, said all the right things, the attitude was good, all that stuff. I don't know. I think everybody's just kind of still trying to feel out the relationship. And, do I think it was an upgrade, when they made the move? Is it an upgrade over Yusuf Nurkic? Yes. I think both from a talent standpoint, and I think also just with both the team and with Nurk, it was just time for them to move on. Just in the same way that like the Ayton thing in Phoenix was just never going to be able to. It wasn't that bad with Nurk, but I think it was just kind of time for that to not be, what it was anymore. But as far as long term, I think he could be the long term guy here in Portland if he wants to be. If he, there are certain games where I don't have the game logs off the top of my head, but there have been a couple of games where he's been the reason that they've won these games. And, you see what the talent level is and, what he can do when he's healthy and locked in and stuff. If he were to do that every night, then yeah, he could be the long-term guy. I don't think they are, looking at, I don't think DeAndre Ayton. I think the only two guys that are completely, when you're talking about like trades or who they're going to build around, the only two guys that I think are just absolutely 100% completely, untouchable off the board right now are probably Scoot Henderson and Shaedon Sharpe. But they still want the Ayton thing to work. I think at least for the next couple of years, that's going to be the guy. Beyond that, I don't know. But when I say I don't know, I'm not saying I don't think one way or the other that any decisions have been made there or any really, there's really any clarity on that. But like, it's the kind of thing where like, yeah, they could try to trade him, but like, who are you going to get better right now?
So it's very much if we seal a deal we like, we'll do it. But in the meantime, we're not in a rush to do a fire sale, is Correct. What you're saying. It's really Thibault. It maybe get shopped around, and Brogdon will have suitors, potentially one in the New York Knicks. That could potentially work.
Yeah,
but,
I think Brogdon. I mean, the other thing about the Jeremy Grant thing that I have been trying to explain to people when they ask me about him is, we've talked about why it makes sense for them to trade Malcolm Brogdon, because all of their young players that are like their core guys they're building around are guards.
Oh, guards, yeah.
Jeremy Grant is not blocking anybody's minutes that needs the development. Like, he's not like them having Jeremy Grant. There's not some guy that they have that is like, oh, they need to play this guy more, and Jeremy Grant being there is blocking him. Like that is not that dynamic is just not there with like Toumani Camara is getting minutes. Jabari Walker is getting minutes. You look at their other young forwards, those guys are not having anything blocked by Jeremy Grant being there. And if anything, it's beneficial for a bad team to have a guy that's like going to score 20 points a game and be able to be like a late game option on offense. If all these young guys don't have anything, like it's Jeremy Grant being in Portland, making the money that he's making is not harmful to the rebuild.
Makes sense. So the last thing I'm going to ask you before I get out of here, which, I mean, you kind of inadvertently answered the Knicks potentially trade for Malcolm Brogdon question, but in general, your thoughts on the Knicks going into this matchup, whether it be your reaction to the OG Anunoby trade and what they gave up and what they obviously got back and who they've what the starting five they've put together, and just your overall impressions from afar of the Knicks, and whether Malcolm Brogdon would take them to a different tier in as far as contender status is in the East.
Brogdon would do well, I think, on a lot of contending teams. That's just the type of he's another guy where like what he does is valuable on good teams.
Makes sense.
He's just like a pretty steady guy now.
So as a backup point guard, that would
exactly
make
now,
a ton of sense. Yeah.
As far as like whether a trade with the Knicks is going to happen, I haven't gone through like which picks do all these teams have and which salary filler makes sense, what any of that stuff. I haven't fully sat down.
The biggest obstacle, honestly, I don't even think is the picks. It's he's the clutch client part of it. So I think, that's a. I know. Actually, is a thing.
I know all the CAA. I know all the CAA stuff with the Knicks, but like, I feel like when it's Malcolm Brogdon and it's not a guy that you're trading for to be like the face of the franchise, I feel like that might be a little bit less of a thing than like the DeJounte Murray thing. I get a little bit more from the Knicks not doing it because he's a clutch guy standpoint, because you're trading for DeJounte Murray to be like a more of a featured guy. Malcolm Brogdon, you trade for him because he's a steady, dependable veteran backup point guard. That's not something that I think you don't do because he's a clutch guy.
I do wonder if the Cam Reddish thing warned us that they may never do business with Clutch again, but there is also the report that
how much of that was Clutch and how much of that was just Cam Reddish is what Cam Reddish
I
is.
think it was a combination.
He was in Portland for a minute last year too,
I remember. Believe me, I remember.
They did not keep him or make any effort to keep him. I mean, he's had a couple good games with the Lakers, but
I think to them, it's still their clients was traded to the Knicks and saw like 27 straight DNPs, whether right or wrong.
Well, I mean, again, Tom has guys that he likes and he doesn't like, but I don't know. I don't know if there was an edict that was like, I mean, you might know this better than I would, but I don't think there was an edict of like the CAA powers that be were like, oh, Cam Reddish, the clutch guy, we're not going to play him. I just think Tom has types of guys that he likes and that he doesn't like, and Cam Reddish is not really a Tibbs type of guy. But as far as like overall what I think of the Knicks, I think the roster, and like I understand that like a lot of Knicks fans probably were not happy that they traded quickly, because
I think it's more 50-50 about the happiness level of the fan base with the trade.
I just see like as in the immediate aftermath of the trade, I just saw a whole lot of, man, I can't believe we traded quickly, and he's really good. I get it, but like I thought that trade made both rosters, both them and the Raptors, I think it made both of those teams make a lot more sense, because the Raptors needed a guy like Quickly in terms of like a lead ball handler and a scoring guard like that. And the Knicks needed, I think what OG does. And first of all, OG also a total Tibbs guy. I don't know. I thought the trade was fine on both sides. And I think both teams got better because of the trade.
I think Jared Dubin came on with us.
Another one of my guys.
I'm just listing all your friends today, aren't I?
Yeah.
And he I thought made the best point as far as trying to verbalize my inner feelings about the trade. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I didn't want them to trade Quickly, but damn it if they didn't make me like the Quickly trade and the fact that it was for OG Anunoby. Like I'm able to swallow that pill a little easier in the fact that it's for the perfect guy that they needed to really make the starting five something pretty great. And so I guess we'll see. We'll see how these teams does in this matchup.
The only game of the Knicks that I've watched since the trade was the first one against Minnesota. Mm-hmm. He looked awesome in that game, and it seems like it's a really good fit. So I think we see this all the time. You and I are both. I hate this term, but sports content creators or whatever. Mm-hmm. There's always this rush to have to be like, oh, who won the trade? Who lost the trade? Just have these snap reactions. I kind of think for what both teams were trying to do, I feel like they both, I mean, I'll say this, Joe Cronin, the Blazers general manager, has talked since he took over the job about 2 years ago about when he does a trade, and he did one with the Knicks last year, the Josh Hart trade. He likes his goal with any trade, because like there are some GMs like, Masai Ujiri is one, Danny Ainge is one, where like they love to hear about like, they love to have the news cycle of like, oh, this guy fleeced this guy. Joe has talked about how he likes to do a deal, and his goal is for both teams to walk away from the deal feeling like they got what they needed to get out of it. And I feel like this is one of those deals with the Knicks and the Raptors where I think both of them did what they needed to do in terms of, I think they both came out better than they were before the trade, both sides of it. And so I don't think it's a winner-loser type of situation or who got the better end of it. I think it made sense for both sides, and I think both teams have been playing better since the trade than they were before it. So I think this trade was a win-win.
So if I could ask one last follow-up before we wrap up, the notion that, I mean, it's pretty enlightening that Cronin would say that's how he enters into trade negotiations. From my perspective on the outside, seeing what went on with Miami over the summer, like what happened? Did he just not feel that Miami was operating under the same faith, and that he got more cooperation in trying to both sides walking away with what they wanted, that he found that in Milwaukee, but he didn't find that in Miami?
I think part of it might have been that. I think part of it was how public Dame's, I don't want to relitigate all this stuff because I did that all summer and I'm over it, but like, I'm just sick of talking about it. But I don't think they liked how public Dame's representation was with the only Miami, we're going to blow up any other potential deal stuff. And I think because of that, like the Blazers and the Heat did not even talk most of the summer. Like the one time they talked was at Summer League. And the way I understand it, the Heat basically said, we're your only option. We'll give you Tyler Hero and 2 firsts and you'll be happy about it. And Joe at that point was like, okay, well, I don't have to take you guys seriously if that's what you're going to do. But I think the other part of it was I think he genuinely didn't really like the stuff that Miami had to offer. And like, I know now like Jaime Jaquez looks awesome and he's, in the running for Rookie of the Year, but like, that's the type of guy that's like a nice player to have for a good team. That's not like a centerpiece of a Damian Lillard trade type of like, this is the young prospect we got back and this guy is going to be a superstar in 3 years. It's not like you trade Paul George, you get back SGA type of thing. And I don't know. Again, I don't want to relitigate this stuff, but when you look at like what they ended up getting, like Toumani Camara came over from Phoenix in the Ayton part of the trade, and he's already starting for Portland. And the pick that they got from the Celtics in the Drew trade from the Warriors, that's this year's pick, that could be a lottery pick, and they're probably going to get another first for Brogdon at the deadline. I think it ended up working. And honestly, as much as like Dame was very adamant during the summer about wanting to go to Miami and was very public about that, he ended up in a better basketball. And I know the Bucks their season hasn't been perfect, but he ended up in a pretty good basketball situation. It's not like they Blake Griffin him and just shipped him off to Detroit and were like, have fun. They sent him to a good situation where he has a chance to contend. So I think overall that whole summer, the deal worked out well for everybody involved. And honestly, Miami's fine. Like they have a good team this year. They're going to be in the playoffs, and you saw them make the finals as a 7 seed last year. Like I think everybody who was involved in that whole situation ended up in a better place than they were at the beginning of the summer.
Yeah, the Heat are able to claim Jaime Jaquez as another Heat culture revelation and victory, and Dame is on a team that is 24-7 against everybody but the Indiana Pacers. So
does it feel? By the way, I get that this is totally unrelated, but I get that there's a whole lot of like weird scheduling stuff because they had to schedule stuff around the tournament, around the in-season tournament, but. Does it feel like the Bucks and the Pacers have played 10 times already this season?
Well, so it's the Bucks and the Pacers, and then they've played 8 times against the Knicks because the Knicks' reward for making the tournament was an extra game against the Bucks and an extra game against the Pacers.
Well, like the Blazers,
against the Celtics, excuse me.
Like Portland has already played the Jazz all 4 times that they're going to play this season. They had the baseball series with Dallas, and then like their 2 games in Portland were like the 2 weeks before that. And their first home game after they get back from this road trip is against Phoenix, who they've also played like 3 times in the last month. So some of these teams, I look at them on the schedule and I'm just like, again? Haven't they played them all the time? Like,
Sean, the Knicks have played the Bucks already 4 times. They played them on Christmas and 2 days before. So they played them like twice at the Garden in the span of 3 days. That's also a
weird thing, by the way. If you're hyping up a Christmas matchup as like this is, the Knicks versus Giannis, or like the Sixers and the Heat. That was the other one.
We haven't seen it since 2 days ago.
Like, right. Like you shouldn't have that be the second half. I don't know.
They had just seen Giannis 4 times, and they just played the Sixers for the first time in January on Friday night. Right. This that's a division opponent.
This stuff is above my pay grade to decide, but I did think that was a little bit weird.
No, as did we, and as respectful as possible, we are, as Knicks fans, excited for the schedule to lighten up a bit. Maybe we play some games at the Garden, and while they are coming in off of victory, the Blazers, there is some hope that the Knicks are going to be able to get on a bit of a roll in this matchup against Portland on Tuesday night. Last words, any predictions about not necessarily the score or like win or loss, but to a Knicks fan that might be worried about facing a 10-25 team, what would you say to them?
I am personally going to be very curious to see how the Blazers come out tomorrow, because if they come out like they did against Brooklyn, I mean, like I talked about it earlier, just how the first 3 games of this road trip, that one in Phoenix and then the 2 in Dallas,
needed to get that Brooklyn
could not have gone. Those
road trip.
First 3 games could not have gone worse. And really, the most alarming one was the second Dallas game, because they get blown out in the first one, and it's like, okay, Luka went off and he got a million free throws. Whatever. There's nothing you can do about that. But to have that type of loss and then Luka to not play in the next game and you still get blown out, like, that's tough.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a good sign for, and because before that, and like again, we talked earlier about like fan reaction to a rebuild and social media chatter and all this stuff. Most of the feedback that I had gotten from fans and readers and subscribers and all of that was that people knew that the season was going to be what it was as far as the record, but they liked watching this team because they're young and they play hard and they're competitive and they're in most of these games even if they're losing a lot of them. And I felt like in the first 3 games of the road trip where they got blown out in all 3 of them, and then especially they got blown out in that last Dallas game without Luka after they got blown out by Dallas before, like, I felt like a lot of that sentiment was starting to wear off a little bit, and now people were wondering if it had turned a corner and not in a good way. And so then, you have that game against Brooklyn last year where even if they had lost, I think they would have been happy with the effort because they were in that one. And it was a little bit more like what it was at the beginning of the season. So if Portland comes out tomorrow against the Knicks, who are, the Knicks aren't a title contender, but they're good. Like, they're a playoff team in the East. They're decent. That's a better team than the Nets team that they just beat. But, like, if they come out with that kind of effort and it's a game, even if they lose, if it's a game, if it's a really, competitive game and they're in it and it's not just a blowout, they'll feel good about, like, okay, those first 3 games of the road trip were just a blip and now we've kind of righted the ship. If they come out flat again and get run off the floor, and that Nets game where they were competitive and they did end up winning was just a blip and they're back to what it was the first 3 games, and I wrote this last night, that's going to tell us something different. So I'm very curious to see how they come out either way, whichever way it goes.
So my curiosity and the wonder of whether or not they do come out flat, 3 days in New York City, and whether or not that could potentially lead to them coming out flat and with the need to get out of the Big Apple after some time in the big city. So we'll see on Tuesday night. Sean, you've been great with your time. Before you get out of here, please tell everybody they can find you and all your stuff.
Well, rosegardenreport.com. It's a pretty similar thing to what it's on Substack, which is what Knicks Film School is on too, and you guys do terrific work. I think the way that I would say I don't want to say I'm doing the same thing with the Blazers as you are with the Knicks, because I think what we do is a little bit of a different thing, because you guys are a lot more into like the breaking down the film and doing like the X's and O's and that type of stuff. And whereas I'm more of like just, a beat writer, like I'm at all the games and practices and I'm, that's kind of more what I'm doing. But I cover the team pretty comprehensively. I'm at all the stuff. I don't travel much. I did this trip for, this one made sense to do. So I am in New York. I'll be at the game tomorrow. But I feel like if you're interested in reading any kind of, comprehensive coverage of the Portland Trail Blazers, whether that's a team you're a fan of, which, I don't know how many of I would imagine most people listening to the Knicks Film School podcast are probably Knicks fans. So I don't know how many people that applies to, but like, if you're just, I don't know, like there are people out there who are maybe fans of a team, but, like knowing what's going on with other teams. If you want to kind of be, keep kept up to date on what's going on with the Portland Trail Blazers, maybe you're a Scoot fan, maybe you just are interested in how the rebuild goes. I believe that what I do, for those of you that decide to pay and subscribe, I believe that I give you your money's worth in that. So that would be my pitch.
It's called the Rose Garden Report. The link to subscribe is in the description of both this episode on YouTube and, of course, in your podcast feed. We support people on Substack here at Knicks Film School. So please support the people that we recommend and that make time for us to come on our podcast. Sean, thank you so much.
Good to talk to you, man.